Hi, I'm Randy Rampel, and welcome to this 10 minutes on Tenant Migration webcast focused on Microsoft Teams migration. In this short webcast, we're going to cover why Microsoft Teams migrations are hard. Topics like the constant change that we see in Microsoft Teams, and the collaboration between Teams and SharePoint, OneDrive, and other M365 workloads. I'll talk about how Teams is made up of many types of content and stored in many locations. With the increased usage of Microsoft Teams, we see huge volumes of data and chat messages. I'll also cover how new features that we see in Teams are often supported by limited APIs. Finally, the growth in Teams usage and several important collaboration features has made it a business-critical application. It's always exciting to see new features come out, and we certainly see that with Microsoft Teams. Features like loop components in Teams chat, shared channels, delayed delivery of chats, chat with self, and so on. Sometimes the supporting methods in the migration APIs lag behind. So a great feature is delivered, but migrating the content of the feature is not quite there. We must also consider how teams exist in an organization. Teams can be used to collaborate with departments and across multiple departments, even to an entire organization. And users can be part of multiple teams within an organization. Planning the migration order of the teams may be dependent on when the user's accounts and mailboxes are migrated. Then consider that some users may already be working in the target tenant while others are still in the source tenant. How do you avoid having active content in two tenants? How do you reconcile the differences? Now add in external and guest users who have access to the source teams. Of course you want to give them access to the target teams, right? You can't recreate the sharing of content, but you can assign direct permissions to the content with limitations. The best thing you can do is start setting expectations with your organization's management, users, and guest users. What makes Teams so powerful and helpful to users also makes it very challenging to migrate. Teams contains many types of content and stores them in different places. So let me run through some of these. Teams channel messages are stored in Azure. The channel files are stored in SharePoint libraries. Users can add more subsites, lists, and libraries to the Teams sites that contains the SharePoint content. The private chats are stored in hidden folders in the mailboxes of users. Files from meetings and private chats are stored in OneDrive. Planner plans are stored in an Azure-based service, but any files are stored in SharePoint. Team meetings are stored in a group calendar, but the various files like recording transcripts, whiteboards are stored in OneDrive. We've ended up with a huge volume of data that sprawls across multiple storage locations. All these different types of content are being actively used and must be migrated successfully within each Teams migration. I recommend that you decide on how to balance migrating each team individually versus migrating the content types across multiple teams together. For example, you may want to migrate all planner plans at one time for all of your teams. Teams is the ideal solution for collaboration. We all know that Teams usage grew substantially over the last 2 years. The rate of increase of Teams users may have slowed down recently, but these users are adding more content every day. Private chat threads grew exponentially when most workers were remote, and private chats can contain more files that are stored in OneDrive. Remote meetings also led to more meeting recordings within shared files, transcripts, and so on. All of this content is stored in OneDrive too. Basically, we don't just have a meeting anymore. We have a meeting where more content is created every time. When migrating Teams content, you must consider migrating the OneDrive files too. The Microsoft Teams chat files folder in OneDrive should be migrated when Teams meetings and private chats are migrated. The Teams client is amazing in how it can display and update content from so many different services. There are multiple APIs that are used for this purpose. Unfortunately, Teams is adding features faster than it can update its migration APIs. In fact, we have two main APIs that we can use for migrations. The problem with the APIs is that we want to use the best of each API, but we can only use one for a migration. We can't really switch back and forth. We often decide regarding performance versus fidelity or quality of content. You can go fast with less content or go slow with more content, but you can't have both. Sometimes faster is better, especially when it comes to chat migrations, and you need to use both APIs. Other times, one API does not support a required feature, so you must use the other API. Of course, this complicates setting the permissions for OAuth authentication. The migration is not impossible to complete, but you have to accept that sometimes there's no easy way to migrate the content. No one does a tenant migration without including Active Directory or email. But let's face it, Teams is now one of the business critical applications that must be migrated. Let's review what some of the key Teams features that make it business critical, some of which I briefly covered already. So the Microsoft Teams application provides many communication options for users. There's one-to-one private chats, there's meetings, calls where Teams acts like a phone. Teams even has connectors for Twitter, Facebook, and dozens of other third-party systems. And Teams offers extensive collaboration options for storing and sharing files, which can end up in SharePoint and OneDrive. But not all of these can be configured during a migration. Some custom connectors must be reinstalled and configured. For example, migrating to a new phone system with on-premises PSTN connectivity requires routing configurations that are outside the scope of what is available in Teams migration APIs. B2B connections must be configured in Azure AD. Sharing of files with external users cannot be recreated. Instead, direct permissions can be set on files with limitations. Users can enable end-to-end encryption for Teams calls on their mobile devices, but that can't be configured during migration either. So some of these configurations must be manually set by Teams administrators prior to or after migrations. Failure to plan for and make these configuration changes can lead to financial impacts. Not having the same communication tools available in the new tenant would certainly be a cause for concern. So trying to migrate all of the different types of content in Teams at the same time can be very difficult. Throttling limitations can and will impact your migrations. So you probably don't want to plan for the fastest possible migration, but you don't want to migrate too slow either. There is too much content to migrate and you need to get it done. Prioritizing which teams to migrate first will help you be successful. One technique is to focus on migrating the top 5% based on usage. Volume, business criticality, or business value. Migrate the last 20% towards the end of the project and set your users' expectations that most private chat messages should be archived. So how can you be the best at your migration? Run reports on the top teams and investigate how the teams are being used. You probably want to talk with your users on how they use Teams. Try to delay migrating teams that have a lot of content but are not actively used. Pre-syncing Teams content as much as possible should make it easier to hit your cutover date with a final sync. Let Teams owners into the target tenant to finish any configurations before the users get in. And it's very important to set expectations. Don't surprise your management or your users at the end of the migration with expectations that they never heard of before. In the end, you need to balance your migration going fast with being careful. Thank you for joining me today to take a look at some of these Microsoft Teams migration topics. If you're interested in trying Quest On Demand migration, please download the free 30-day trial. And if you found this helpful, watch our other 10-minute on tenant migration webcast shown here.